The crowd roared as the dust curled up into the Texas sun. In the middle of the rodeo ring, a massive paint horse spun wild, eyes blazing, foam dripping from his mouth, hooves slicing the air. No one dared get close. Then, from behind the fence, an old man stood still, silent, watching, and the horse, Dusty, stopped just for a second and looked right at him. Before he was Dusty, they called him Little Storm. Born during a thunderhead deep in the Texas hill country, he was wild from the start, fast, sharp, untamed. He ran with the wind and drank from creeks that whispered through cedar groves. No bit, no bridle, just freedom. He belonged to a quiet rancher named Elias Walker, who raised him not with rope, but with rhythm and trust. They shared more than land. They shared silence, the kind that speaks louder than words. But drought came. Then debt. Elias sold the land first, then the tools. Finally, he sold the horse. Dusty disappeared into trailers and contracts, passed from hand to hand until he landed in the iron grip of Clayton Rhodes, a man who didn't train horses so much as break them. Now, Dusty lived behind steel gates, pulled by chains, hitched with spurs. What used to be fire in his chest had turned into rage in his blood. Clayton didn't want a partner. He wanted a showpiece. And when Dusty fought back, Rhodes smiled. That one's cursed. Nobody rides him, not unless they've got a death wish. But Dusty's rage wasn't born from nowhere, and the man he once belonged to wasn't done yet. The last time Elias saw Dusty, the horse was barely 3, still lanky, still learning the rhythm of his own legs. That morning, the sky was bruised with clouds, and Elias couldn't look him in the eye. He handed the lead rope to a man in a pressed shirt who never touched the animal, just nodded and opened the checkbook. Dusty resisted. He reared. His eyes begged. But Elias didn't fight for him. He just watched the trailer door slam shut, and with it, a chapter of his soul. Years passed. Now, sitting on a weathered porch with a mug of black coffee and the sound of cicadas for company, Elias lived quiet with his granddaughter Lily. He built rocking chairs for neighbors and fixed fences when they asked. His body ached, but his mind stayed sharp, especially when it wandered backward. One morning, Lily burst through the screen door, waving a flyer. "Grandpa, look, big prize money. They're having a challenge over in Oak Ridge. A horse no one can ride. Everyone's talking about it." Elias didn't look up. She pressed the paper into his hands. There, grainy and wild-eyed, was Dusty. Thicker now, scarred, but unmistakable. He ran a finger over the picture. "You know him?" Lily asked. "I knew him before the world did," Elias said softly. They sat in silence for a long while. Then Lily whispered, "You could win." Elias shook his head. "This ain't about winning." Later that day, while cowboys prepped their gear and crowds gathered at Rhodes Arena, Elias leaned against the far fence in dusty boots and an old felt hat. Nobody noticed him. Some laughed. "Old man's lost," someone muttered. Dusty was in the ring, furious, foam and fire. He'd already bucked off 3 men, one of them still limping. From his viewing box, Clayton Rhodes lifted his bourbon and bellowed, "$5 grand to the man who stays on that beast for 5 seconds." Dusty snapped at the air, and Elias, quiet and still, never blinked. Because the horse he raised wasn't angry. He was afraid, and somewhere inside that chaos, Elias recognized the heartbeat he'd once held in his hand. Dusty circled the arena like a storm contained by fences. His hooves cracked against the packed earth, foam spilling from his mouth. A new rider, younger and cocky, adjusted his gloves and mounted with the swagger of someone who hadn't been thrown yet. The gate opened. 4 seconds later, he hit the dirt so hard the crowd gasped. He lay there, stunned, pride bruised more than bones. Clayton Rhodes roared with laughter. "That one barely counted. Who's next?" Dusty spun, flanks heaving, eyes wild. He wasn't just bucking, he was lashing out at something deeper. Betrayal, maybe. Loss. Elias watched, unmoved, from behind the fence. He didn't speak, he didn't cheer or flinch. But as Dusty passed the far side of the ring, something odd happened. The horse slowed, just slightly. His ears turned toward the old man's direction. And Elias did something no one noticed. He whispered a name the horse hadn't heard in years. "Hey there, Dusty, my boy." It wasn't loud. It wasn't magic. But Dusty stopped. The crowd didn't see it. They were too busy laughing at the old man by the fence. "Look at Grandpa Cowboy over there. Bet he thinks he's Clint Eastwood or something." But Dusty stared through the noise, through the dust and heat. Lily tugged at her grandfather's shirt. Did he hear you?" Elias didn't answer. He just watched. Clayton squinted from his platform, frowning. "Who the hell is that?" Another rider stepped up, gear jingling, slapping dust off his chaps. "Let's get this over with." Before the gate even opened, Dusty thrashed inside the chute like a caged wildfire. The moment the latch clicked, he exploded. The rider never had a chance. 3 seconds, the announcer called, voice cracking. Clayton stood now, leaning forward. He was enjoying this too much. "Keep 'em coming, we'll be here all night," he shouted, waving his glass. But Elias had already moved. He walked to the sign-up table. The girl behind the clipboard blinked. "Sir, you here for someone?" Elias nodded. "Yeah, Elias Walker, put me down." She hesitated. For the challenge." "That's right." She looked over his shoulder as if expecting a joke. "You're serious?" Elias gave her a tired smile. "I've never been more." She scribbled his name reluctantly. "Good luck, Mr. Walker. I mean, just be careful, okay?" Elias tipped his hat and returned to the rail. Dusty hadn't taken his eyes off him, and for the first time that day, the old man saw something different in the horse's stare. It wasn't fury. It was memory. That night, after the last rider limped off and the crowd thinned into shadows, Dusty stood alone in the holding pen behind the arena. His sides rose and fell in uneven rhythm. Cuts along his hind leg oozed dry blood, and his eyes twitched at every noise, boots, metal gates, voices. He didn't sleep, he never did. The barn light buzzed overhead like a dying bee. A handler walked past, looked at the bruises, and spat into the straw. "Crazy damn horse," he muttered. "Oughta just put him down." Dusty flinched, but not at the voice, at the memory. Once someone had called him by name. Not monster, not waste of money, but Dusty, and that someone had smelled like cedar and wood shavings. Inside the main house, Clayton Rhodes poured another glass. "He'll break tomorrow," he said to one of his ranch hands. "They always do." But Elias sat on the edge of a borrowed motel bed, staring at a folded square of fabric, an old ragged blanket, faded blue, with a tear in the corner. The one he used to cover Dusty with on cold mornings, the one Dusty used to nip at, like a puppy with a toy. Lily stood in the doorway, watching. "Are you really going back tomorrow?" Elias didn't look up. "I never should have let him go. You didn't have a choice. There's always a choice," he whispered. He got up before dawn, dressed slow, tied his boots with fingers that trembled just a little more than yesterday. Then he walked, not to the main gate, but to the back stables. The air was still. Dusty paced in his pen like a ghost hunting a way out. Elias didn't speak, just stood where the shadows couldn't touch him. He didn't bring treats or ropes or a saddle, just the blanket. He unfolded it, held it in both hands and waited. Dusty stopped moving. He sniffed once, then again. Something ancient shifted in his chest. Elias stepped closer, slow, careful. A man not seeking control, but forgiveness. "Remember this?" he asked quietly. Dusty didn't move, but he didn't charge either. His ears flicked forward. "I didn't fight for you. I should have found a way." The blanket fluttered a little in the breeze. I need you to know I never forgot." He held the blanket out, arms shaking. Not from fear, but from hope. Dusty inched forward. 1 step, 2, then stopped. Elias lowered the blanket, tears biting at the corners of his eyes. "It's okay. You don't have to trust me." But Dusty did something then, something simple, small. He stepped forward, pressed his muzzle into the blanket and breathed. Long, slow. And Elias? He dropped to his knees, not in pain, but in awe. Later that morning, back at the arena, As riders lined up again and announcers polished their jokes, a quiet buzz moved through the crowd. "Old man's back. Someone tell him Medicare doesn't cover this kind of thing." Clayton leaned over the fence, grinning. "Didn't think you'd return, Walker." Elias didn't respond. He just walked past him. But inside Dusty's pen, the horse stood still, watching, waiting. Elias reached the gate, unlatched it, and Dusty didn't rear. He didn't snort. He walked forward, one step at a time. No one spoke. The silence felt like a held breath. And though no saddle touched his back and no rope tied him down, Dusty stood beside the man who had once let him go. But not again. Have you ever looked into an animal's eyes and felt something deeper than instinct, something like memory? Sometimes the world breaks them so badly that people forget they ever trusted in the first place. But all it takes is one moment, one voice they remember. If you've ever had to earn back trust or fight to remind someone who they were, drop a comment. You're not alone in that battle. By noon the stands were full again. Vendors yelled over country music. Kids balanced lemonade cups while cowboys told stories too big to be true. At the sign-up table, Elias stood quiet, hat in hand. The girl blinked at him. "Back again?" He nodded. "Last time." She looked him over. He didn't seem stronger than yesterday. Maybe even more tired. But his eyes had changed. Inside the holding pen, Dusty paced less. He wasn't calm, not yet. But he wasn't wild either, just waiting. Lily sat near the front row now, fingers twisted in her sleeves. She didn't cheer, she didn't smile, she just believed. Back at the pen, Elias approached with no rope, no gear, just the old blue blanket folded under one arm. He opened the gate. Dusty stepped forward, unprompted. Clayton leaned out of his VIP box. "Somebody stop that old man before he gets trampled." But no one moved. They watched instead. Elias placed the blanket on the fence rail and waited. Dusty nuzzled it once, then turned, slow, deliberate, and lowered his head beside Elias's chest. The arena didn't cheer. It didn't need to. Elias laid a hand on Dusty's neck, the same way he had when the horse was just a foal, scared of thunder. "I'm not here for a trophy," Elias whispered. "I'm here for you and the horse. Let him stay." From across the arena, Lily wiped her eyes and stood. Because in that quiet choice, no saddle, no reins, no command, something changed. Dusty had made his decision. He remembered who he was. And more than that, he remembered who Elias had been. That evening, long after the sun dipped behind the hilltops and the crowd had filtered back to their trucks and trailers, Elias stayed. He walked the perimeter of the arena, watched the handlers, studied the gate latches, noticed where the shadows fell at noon and where they vanished by dusk. He wasn't planning a performance. He was planning a reunion with truth, with the past, with the animal who once followed him without question. Dusty stood in the corner of the pen, not pacing this time, waiting. His ears twitched at every creak in the boards, but when Elias arrived, he exhaled. Loud and long, Elias reached into his coat pocket, pulled out an apple, soft, bruised, sweet. Dusty took it gently from his palm. A ranch hand walked by and slowed. "He lets you feed him now?" Elias nodded. "He don't let nobody close." The young man looked from Dusty to Elias, then added quietly, "They tried to break him. Guess they just didn't know he'd already been broken once, and survived it." In the days that followed, Elias kept showing up, early, late, always with calm steps and that same old blanket over his shoulder. He didn't train Dusty like a cowboy. He reminded him what it meant to move beside a man, not beneath him. They walked small circles in the dirt, practiced starts and stops with nothing but breath and presence. Elias would touch his own chest, and Dusty would mirror the stillness. He'd whistle low, and Dusty would turn without rope. Lily watched from the fence each morning, biting her lip, half terrified, half awestruck. Clayton Rhodes noticed too. He came down from his platform one morning, boots crunching the dirt. "What are you doing with my horse?" Elias didn't flinch. "Reminding him he's not yours." Clayton chuckled. We'll see how long that lasts when the crowd's watching. And that was the threat, because the final ride was approaching. The public one. The one with cameras, spotlights, cash prizes, and Clayton's reputation on the line. Elias knew, one wrong move and they'd say it was luck. Two wrong moves and they'd say it was fraud. He didn't have many moves left, but he had one more truth to offer. He leaned against Dusty's shoulder that night and whispered, "You don't owe them anything, but if you still trust me, walk beside me tomorrow, just once more." And Dusty, with no rope and no bridle, closed his eyes. Not in surrender, in agreement. By the time the announcer called his name, the crowd had gone from amused to uneasy. Next up, Elias Walker. There were no cheers, just murmurs, whispers, a hush that tasted like disbelief. Clayton Rhodes leaned forward in his private box, lips curled into a smirk. "He's gonna get himself killed." Lily gripped the railing, white-knuckled. Her eyes didn't blink. Elias didn't put on spurs, didn't wear gloves. He stepped into the arena like he was walking into a memory, calm, steady, sure. Dusty stood behind the gate. He wasn't thrashing now, just waiting, one hoof shifting quietly in the dirt. His muscles still twitched, but not from fear, from readiness. The gate creaked. It didn't fly open. It was Elias who opened it from the outside, gently, one hinge at a time, and Dusty stepped through. No one moved. The audience held their breath like a single lung. Elias walked to the center of the ring. No rope, no saddle, just the old blue blanket tucked under his arm. He turned, looked at Dusty, and nodded once. The horse trotted forward, not out of command, not out of fear, but because that man had once stayed up 3 nights during a storm just to keep him warm. Clayton stood now, shouting, "Where's the gear? Where's the bridle? This ain't regulation." But no one listened. Elias placed the blanket across Dusty's back. Then slowly, so slowly, he mounted. Not with force, not with style, but with reverence. The crowd was silent. Phones hovered in the air, recording every second. The arena, once filled with dust and screams, now held only breath and stillness. Elias sat tall, the way he had decades ago. He clicked his tongue once. Dusty walked, then trotted, then turned, a perfect controlled circle around the arena. Clayton's face turned red. "This is a setup. That horse is doped. This is a damn trick." Elias stopped in the center of the ring, slid off Dusty's back, dropped the blanket to the ground, then took a step forward. And Dusty followed, one step, then another, no reins, no voice, no command, just choice. The crowd erupted, not in screams, but in a slow, rising wave of applause, not for a stunt, but for something older than showmanship, respect. Clayton burst from the box, storming down the steps. "You can't just walk off with my horse. That animal's registered to my ranch." Elias turned to face him, calm, collected. "You might own his body, but you never had his soul." And Dusty, he stepped between them, stood in front of Elias, ears forward, chest out, like a line drawn in the dirt. Clayton froze. Something flickered in his eyes. Fear. The announcer didn't say a word. Because the story was already being written, Elias walked toward the exit gate. Dusty followed, without pressure, without doubt. And no one, not the announcer, not the handlers, not even Clayton Rhodes himself, moved to stop them. Because everyone watching knew that wasn't a horse being ridden. That was a bond, reclaiming itself. Back in the hills outside Oak Ridge, Elias's cabin stood crooked under the shadow of old pine trees. The porch sagged. The paint peeled. But the place breathed differently now. Lily sat on the steps with a book in her lap. Inside, a kettle hissed softly. Out in the field, Dusty grazed. No bridle, no saddle, just the wind brushing through his mane like it used to when he was young. Neighbors stopped by more often, not to gawk but to listen. Some brought fence posts, others brought questions. "What did you do to him?" one asked. Elias, wiping his hands on a rag, gave the same answer every time. "I didn't fix him. I remembered him. And he remembered me. Dusty would wander up to the porch sometimes, rest his head against the wood rail, eyes half closed, like he finally belonged to the world again. Clayton Rhodes never came back. Some said he was embarrassed. Others said he sold half his stock the month after the event, but Elias never asked. He had no interest in revenge, only peace. And as fall settled into the bones of the hills, Elias would sit in his rocker with a blanket over his knees, listening to the steady rhythm of hoofbeats across his land. Not broken, not beaten, just home. Elias didn't reclaim Dusty through strength or skill. He did it through memory, through showing up quietly, patiently, until the bond that time had buried could breathe again. Sometimes we're told it's too late, that we're too old, too broken, too forgotten to make a difference. But stories like Elias's prove otherwise. You don't need a crowd to matter. You don't need permission to fight for what's still in your heart. So tell me, have you ever had to rebuild something everyone else thought was gone? A friendship, a dream, a part of yourself? Drop a comment below. Let someone know they're not the only one walking that road. And if this story found a quiet corner in your soul, share it. You never know who might be waiting for a reason to remember. Thank you for being here, and wherever you are, keep showing up. Someone might be waiting.